Oh, there's a question first.
Tonight is a budget meeting and the question period is only related to budget.
Right, it's only related to budget today.
You're more than welcome to come January 13th. Here, I'm talking, sorry.
That's public consultation.
Yeah, it's public consultation on January 13th. Well, it's the presentation of the master plan and the zoning bylaws and all the related bylaws.
Tonight doesn't deal with that at all. That's the budget for the city and the tax rates later. Doesn't deal with master plan at all.
Yes, there's two meetings. There's
Yeah.
this meeting now and 7 o'clock, but you're welcome to ask
Yeah, if it's-
your question now.
The tax rate question's at 7 though.
But
It doesn't matter.
if you have a question
Yeah.
related to the budget or the tax question, tax rates, we'd love to hear. Yeah. So maybe I'll clarify. Thank you for coming, Ms. Marciano. So just to clarify, so the city controls only municipal taxes. So for Côte Saint-Luc, there's basically your base tax, and then there's a small water tax and a road reserve tax. So those are what is controlled by the city of Côte Saint-Luc. There's also a welcome tax, which is for purchase of new homes or new property. So probably when you bought your condo, you had to pay a welcome tax. In terms of school taxes, it's actually managed by and I believe it's the Conseil de Gestion de Taxes Scolaires de l'Île de Montréal, if I'm saying it correctly. So that is an organization from Montreal that oversees the 2 English and 3 French school boards. So that is not done by the city of Côte Saint-Luc. Now, what I will also share is kind of switching hats, working at Solomon Schechter Academy, working at a Jewish day school. The Jewish day schools actually do get some funding from the provincial government through the Conseil de Gestion de Taxes Scolaires de l'Île de Montréal. So there is some funding. So I guess my answer to you is that your school tax, technically, part of that does actually go to help partially subsidize the Jewish day school. So it's not a perfect answer, but just so you understand, as a city, we have no control over the school tax, but some of that funding does in fact go to private schools, or most private schools. There are some private schools, I should mention, that don't get any funding, but most actually do get some subsidies from the government. So sorry, maybe I'll clarify again. So you'll pay your Côte Saint-Luc taxes. That's in 2 installments. And that's usually earlier in the year, let's say in February and in May. And actually, I'll tell you the exact dates. I just have to double check the exact dates before to make sure I don't say the incorrect ones. But the school tax is usually, someone will correct me, August and October, I believe. So the school tax is usually August and October. So that is a separate tax. You don't pay it directly to the city. You pay it to the conseil de gestion, the taxe scolaire de l'île de Montréal. So you're paying it to them directly. And Côte Saint-Luc, we don't ever see that money. So again, the money for the Côte Saint-Luc comes directly to us. That is managed. Part of that money, I should say, we do submit to the central city to cover things like fire and police and public transit. And that's something I'll talk about it. I'm going to do a brief presentation on the budget. But in terms of the school tax, so again, that doesn't come to Côte Saint-Luc at all. That goes directly to this organization from Montreal that oversees the 5 school boards on the island of Montreal. And part of the subsidies do go to the private schools. And again, that is controlled by the provincial government. Thank you. Thanks. All right. So I'll start with the resolution, and then we'll get, I guess, a seconder, and then I'll do a brief presentation. And then you will do the vote after? Yeah, so maybe we'll do the vote after. Yeah. Yep. So be it resolved that Côte Saint-Luc City Council hereby adopts the 2025 operating budget as follows. Revenues of $92,710,000, expenses of $94,540,250, appropriations of $6,234,530, other adjustments or depreciation of negative $8,064,780 for a total net expenses of $92,710,000 for a neutral budget. Hereby annexed to the minutes to form an integral part of said document entitled Annex 1. So just give me 1 second to get organized here. So what I'll do is I'll do a brief presentation, I guess, for those in the audience and for those watching at home. It's not, and I guess for my fellow councilors, it's like a shortened version. So I'm going to go through the slides quickly. However, there's in the back of the room, there's full copies, and there are copies available also online as well. So share my screen. Okay, perfect. So again, today we're going to be adopting first the operating budget, and then once we're finished this, the next resolution will be for the capital investment budget. And like I said, I'll go through it sort of quick. These are some of the guiding principles. I guess in terms of the key ones, I would say a few things. The city, we want to try to leverage as much as possible federal and provincial funds to help offset the costs. We want to make sure that we try to limit our borrowing as much as possible. And we use what we call our working fund. So we're borrowing from ourselves. We also want to focus on what our core business is and what makes Côte Saint-Luc, and trying not to deviate from that too much. En termes des services, il y a les services locaux et les services de quote-part ou les services d'agglomération. Alors, locaux, par exemple, les travaux publics, protection civile, loisirs, la bibliothèque, notre centre communautaire aquatique. Et en termes des services d'agglomération, comme je disais tout à l'heure, il y a la police, service d'incendie, le transport en commun et le service, le centre d'urgence 911, par exemple. So in terms of the overall concept, as I mentioned earlier, the goal is for the money coming in, or the revenues, to balance with the money going out, which is the expenses. So in terms of the overview, so we have a net increase in taxation revenue about 2.26%. Increase in transfer duties is up 16.5%. And this is based on the sale of, in terms of welcome taxes that we've seen this year. We hope the trend will continue next year, although we're not expecting as much as the current year. Increase in government transfers, although that's partially offset by expenses, for a total increase in revenue of 4.2%. And on the flip side, in terms of expenses, also again a matching 4.2%. Local expenses up about 4.9%, and the Côte-Part and expense for downtown up 3.2%. Cette année, c'est la dernière année, c'est la troisième année du rôle d'évaluation. Le nouveau à l'évaluation va commencer en janvier 2026. Alors, on attend probablement au mois de septembre. On va recevoir de nouveaux rôles. Mais ce que ça veut dire pour Côte Saint-Luc, c'était une augmentation d'à peu près 37,8%, qui était plus haut que la moyenne pour l'île de Montréal, qui était à 32,4%. So we'll see in September what the increase is for Côte Saint-Luc. We hope the goal is for our average to be at or slightly lower than the average for the island of Montreal, in which case we can hopefully do lower tax increases. If it's higher, then that's of course where it gets more problematic. In terms of the current role, so our average, I'll start with our average single family home or single family house. So it is 985,000 in terms of family home, which includes houses, condos, and townhouses. So it's 757,000. And what we did is, because the increase was significant for many at almost 40%, we spread out the increase over 3 years. And that's generally what we've done in most cases. And obviously we'll look into that in September and October and decide for the following year. So this is for an average increase for a residential home. And again, this includes houses, condos, and townhouses. So the average increase was 2.49%, which is in line with inflation, in line with what we're seeing for most of the other cities. I would say we're somewhere in the middle. There's quite a few that are higher and a few that are lower. And that's where we aim to be. And if we see compared to the previous year, it was at 5.95%. And the next slide, we'll see, cela c'est pour la maison moyenne. Alors, c'était augmentation plus haut parce que pour les maisons unifamiliales, c'était une valeur moyenne de 985 100 $. Alors, l'augmentation moyenne, c'était de 3,12%. Again, in terms of the overall budget, so we have an increase of about 4.2%. So the new total in terms of revenue and expenses is at $92.7 million. So just to give the breakdown of the revenue, the biggest percentage or the biggest chunk is revenue from taxes. So we have some local improvement taxes that goes back related to work at Cavendish Mall. Revenue from tariffs, so that's for swimming pools, compensation for city services. So this is for tax exempt properties in terms of some small fees they pay to cover water and other uses, and compensation Leo taxes. So this is for federal and provincial government buildings, post offices, schools, etc. En termes de répartition des revenus, comme je disais, le revenu de taxes, ça compte pour 84% de tous nos revenus. Il y a aussi les autres revenus et la compensation en lieu de taxes qui est à peu près 2%. So in terms of our local expenses, so this is excluding the expenses for the agglomeration. So you see some of the big items, the general administration, public safety, and so on. One of the bigger increases is for public safety, where we're adding an extra vehicle on the road, extra staff member to ensure that the city and help keep the city safe. And we have one of our public security agents who's here with us today. Thank you. In terms of other expenses, so some other appropriations we have, I guess one to mention is appropriations from the election reserve. 2025, there'll be an election in November. So what the city has been doing the last few years is putting aside funds, and this is a new requirement of the provincial government so that it doesn't affect us all in 1 year. And the appropriation in terms of pension, which is actually a negative one, is also related to, we were up until last year, I should say till 2024, we were paying for the fallout of the 2008 stock market crash or banking crisis. So finally, we're done with that in terms of the pension. So that also accounts for a decrease in the appropriations. In terms of the agglomeration, so the total increase works out to about 3.2%. I'll just say, I guess, some of the highlights, there's still some increases every year. One of the points to remember or to note is that we are continuing to pay for the agglomeration deficit of previous years. It seems, and I know Councillor Burke uses this term, somewhat of a structural deficit where we keep seeing deficits at the agglomeration level, both overall and in certain departments. So if you see 535,000 of these funds are to pay for the deficit, and I believe it is from 2023, we're paying the deficit. En termes de répartition des dépenses, alors le plus grand, c'est pour le Côte-Part, c'est à peu près 40%, 41% du budget. Il y a l'administration, il y a les travaux publics, la bibliothèque, loisirs, mais celles-là sont les dépenses, les grandes dépenses pour la ville de Côte Saint-Luc. In terms of the tax rates, so these, and again, it's not so easy maybe to see on the screen, but these are available online. So what we've done as the property valuation increases, the tax rates go down slightly every year. But what you see are some of the increase. The only one I'll share that is slightly up is the tax rate for vacant land. And this is a new allowance from the government that Côte Saint-Luc is doing, and other cities as well, where we've increased the rate for vacant land. And the goal is to try to encourage those owning vacant land to basically develop it and make it a more useful space. And hopefully, I know Councillor Cohen has mentioned an area in his district where there's some vacant land that has been sitting for too long. Two spots. Sorry, there's 2 spots that are vacant land that have been sitting too long. We hope that the developers will develop them and turn them into nice properties for the city. These are the categories for non-residential. And this is something we started doing several years ago, where we have our base category, a reference category, and then we have different levels or different taxation rates for the malls, office towers, the railway, and you also see the rates for the water tax and the road reserve. In terms of capital investments, and this will, as soon as we will adopt the operating budget in a moment, then we'll do the capital investment, but I'll just share now to cover both points. So in terms of road resurfacing and sidewalks, we're going to be spending about $5 million next year, which is one of the largest amounts. For several years, we were focusing on the water pipes, where we sleeved about 25% of the pipes. Now we're focusing more on the roads, and at the same time doing potential lead replacements of some of the service lines. So we have a few streets to mention: Fleet westbound from Pinedale to Cavendish, Wolseley from Wavell to Guelph, Borden from Fleet to Bailey, Wavell from Parkhaven to Melling. And we plan to do approximately 78 lead service lines. And I'll just mention in terms of sidewalks, we're going to be doing about 2,300 square meters of sidewalk, which is about double what we've done in an average year the previous year. So this is represent an increase, significant increase. And we realize that the sidewalks are not all in the best shape. And especially with our population, we want to make sure people can navigate them safely. And one more to mention is continuing to work on the traffic light and street lights, putting in new conduits for street lights, and we're also continuing to turn the street lights into LEDs. We've covered all what we call the Cobra heads, which are on the main streets, like Cavendish and Côte Saint-Luc Road. And over the next few years, we'll be working out what we call the cubes, and hope to have those completed soon. In terms of parks and public spaces, we have an additional, this is the last year of our additional budget of $100,000 for trees. We had to cut down just over 2,000 trees over the last several years due to the emerald ash borer. So we finally caught up, but we're continuing to try to increase the canopy over Côte Saint-Luc, renovations of the dugouts at Trudeau Park, renovations as well to the bathroom, some small park projects, including Bellan, Fillon, Hellfield Park, where there's play equipment, McDowell and Roback, some water features, Itzhak Rabin, completion of pathways, and various parks benches. And I'll just mention here too, we increased the small park budget, which was approximately $300,000 to about $500,000 in 2025. And we're hoping to be able to continue to work on improving our parks. En termes de l'immeuble, il y a la conversion à l'éclairage dans le ACC. Il y a des remplacements de tuyaux dans le centre de loisirs, à l'hôtel de ville. Il y a le mur de soutènement qui est juste derrière l'immeuble, près de l'entrée de la bibliothèque, et aussi la passerelle juste en avant, et remplacement des panneaux électriques existants au garage des travaux publics. Et ça va nous aider quand on va avoir plus et plus de véhicules électriques. Ça sera beaucoup plus facile de les charger. So when we have the new panel, I think that's, not sure if it's tonight or on Wednesday night, we're going to have more electric vehicle charging available. And finally, second to last one, for some vehicles, 2 6-wheel dump trucks replacing vehicles from 2004, 2011, Zamboni, which was required with our 2 ice services. We had a previous one that we had to retire a few years ago. We didn't replace it. tractor with salt spreader, and 2 public security vehicles, which we are hoping to get electric. I know there's still some technical issues, a snowplow, a tractor, and so on. And I guess just some other general equipment, new cameras, security system upgrades, UPS, which is a battery backup, some furniture, water fountains, and installation of a shed behind the Public Works yard. And these, I should mention, are financed by the working fund, which is where we borrow money from ourselves rather than borrowing from bank, which means we don't pay any interest. And I believe that's, yeah, the last slides. I'll stop sharing. So I'll just mention, well, for those in the audience, those watching at home, so this was a brief version. If you want to see the full version, it was the meeting of this, it was December 2nd. So you can see the full, let's say, hour-long version. This was, let's say, a 15-20-minute version. And again, the presentation is available in full on the website. So I encourage people to read it. And if they have any questions, and obviously not necessarily here, they can always send me an email at serly@cotesaintluc.org or to finance@cotesaintluc.org. Thank you.
So, we need to second it all in favor. Carried unanimously, and we move to the next item, which is adoption of the capital investment budget.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Be it resolved that the Côte Saint-Luc City Council hereby accepts and adopts the 5-year capital expenditure plan for the 2025 to 2029 years, totaling $61,433,500 plus applicable taxes, hereby annexed to the minutes to form an integral part of said document entitled Annex 2.
Moved by Councilor, seconded by Councilor Baskey. Any discussion?
So I won't go through the items. I'll just mention this briefly. So we're technically adopting the capital expenditure plan for 5 years. However, really, the projects that we are working on right now are the projects for next year. So just to mention, this changes year to year because we're constantly adopting and adjusting. And even just to mention, just to share with the council, one that we've been talking about quite a bit is the Côte Saint-Luc Road underpass. So I was just talking to the director of finance, and even that he was mentioning may have to be shifted. That's one we're partnering with Montreal, so we're on our timeline, but their timeline at the same moment, if that makes sense. So all that to say, the focus is on next year, where the spending, well, we expect to borrow approximately $6 million, which is in line with what we've done the last several years to try to keep our borrowing rate and the amount of money we're paying in interest and so on at an acceptable rate. But all that to say, we're adopting the 5-year budget, but focusing on the next year ahead. Thank you.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously, and now I ask for adjournment.
Correct.
Councilor?
Yeah.
Councilor Sabag, all in favor? We will adjourn.